Hello, I am sitting here with Scott Tillitt, who I have never met before, but I saw him post to our Facebook group and I sort of stalked him and was like, Scott, we need to talk about your co-working story and your ambassador program. So, Scott, I don't know anything about your story and I can't wait to hear it. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, I was Googling where you are. So, one of your locations is in Beacon, New York. How far from the city are you? From New York?
About an hour. Actually, we're an hour 20 to Grand Central. We're on Regional Rail, the Metro North.
Oh, wow. Perfect.
hmm
Yeah.
Straight up the river. We're actually on the Hudson.
Are you where everybody wanted to live after the pandemic?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
And I mean, we were before we started
oh, you
this,
already were. And now, right.
Yeah, but we were talking real estate prices because you were
Yeah.
out in just outside of San Francisco. I mean, real estate in Beacon has increased a lot I've been here now 17 years. It's increased
Okay.
a lot in the 17 years because I mean, this is a pre-pandemic thing. We're in the Hudson Valley, which you've probably heard of. It's a very hot area, and it's been that way for quite a while. In Beacon, in particular, a world famous art museum opened here just before I moved here, but maybe not 19 years ago or so. And we're on the train line, an hour 20 to Grand Central. So it's one of those really hot areas, an hour outside of the city where everyone has escaped to.
Right. Right. And to your point, even before the pandemic, wanted to escape too. So I
Yeah,
grew up between Binghamton and Syracuse. And
way
people
up
would be
there,
like, yeah, exactly. They'd be like, oh, upstate New York. I'd be like, well, way upstate, not
way
like what
upstate.
you're picturing, right? Train line,
Right.
farmland. I was like, no, I'm keep going a few hours.
Used to be there was a t-shirt store in town and they had a shirt with New York State on it and then a star or something where Beacon is, and it said, does this look like upstate to you?
That's
Because
funny.
when you come at like Beacon is pretty far down when
It's
you look
pretty
at
far
all
down.
of New
Yeah,
York
if you look
State,
at the
because New York
map.
State
Yeah.
is big.
Yeah. But still, your population is 13,000 and it looks like an
15 or so,
adorable
yeah.
small town. So,
It's a very adorable small town with a very vibrant main street. In fact, it's one of the longest main streets in the country. It's just over a mile long. You just don't
ah,
have main streets that are
that
like
are,
this.
yeah,
Downtown areas are blocks and
yeah.
they're whatever, and it's actually called Main Street and it is the spine of the city. And that's where we started 14 plus years
I
ago.
know, right. So 2009 was like before co-working was on the internet. I,
Before it was on the internet.
yeah, before 2009, because I opened in Chicago at the very beginning of 2012. So I was doing all my research in 2011. Like, there wasn't like how to start a co-working space on the internet. You were making it up.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
There weren't resources. Well, there was a
Yeah.
Google group, the co-working Google group.
Sure.
There were a
Yes, they were.
few, yeah,
Yeah.
there were a few kind of pioneers who were
Yeah.
sharing tons. It
Right.
really was a
Alex
movement
and
then. Alex Hillman,
yeah.
whom I've met a number of times, Tony Bacigalupo, who's
Yep.
been to my space a couple of
Oh,
times.
nice.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah. Jerome started in 2010,
Jerome,
so pretty early.
yep, yeah,
I'm just
for
saying, though,
sure.
there was like a sprinkling and you had to know how to
There was
find
a
the
spring.
Google
You
group.
had to know.
Yeah.
Had to know where to look in the
Yeah.
recesses of the internet, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. So how did you end up so you live in Beacon?
I do.
Okay.
I guess the story kind of begins in 2006. I was living in Brooklyn, and
Okay.
I joined a writer space in Manhattan near Union Square called Paragraph, which was essentially a co-working space for writers. Although I don't know if I knew the term. They didn't use
Use
co-working, the
the term.
term,
Yeah.
and according to lore, it was started in 2005 and by Brad Newberg in
Yeah.
San Francisco. So we really, less than a year before. So anyway, I joined that writer space and I had been working for myself at that point for about 5 years or so. And I worked from coffee shops, bouncing around lower Manhattan and Brooklyn and whatever. So I was primed for co-working, even if I didn't know that it existed. So I joined this writer space. And then I was a member just for a short time because then I moved to Beacon, an hour north.
Okay.
And there obviously was nothing like that in Beacon. And
Wait,
after a
and you
couple of,
were a writer. What was the work you were doing?
well, I was a writer, but primarily I was a PR and communications consultant. And this
Oh,
actually ties into why I started Beehive. But I was writing for a magazine about completely unrelated stuff, photography, but I was primarily PR and communications. You know, I did some of that work at Paragraph too, and working in social impact. So nonprofits and foundations and books and films with a message. You know, I promoted several of the Dalai Lama's visits. I promoted an anti-war documentary that Phil Donahue produced. So I was in that world, environmental stuff, social
okay.
justice, et cetera. And when I moved to Beacon, I really fell in love with the community in Beacon. Population's about 15,000,
Okay.
depending on where you look. But so it's a small community. As I said, it's a very vibrant main street. And at the time, in 2006, when I moved, you know, there was a handful of folks who moved up from Brooklyn. So it was a small, tight-knit sort of expat, like city expats,
Yeah.
right?
What
And
prompted you to move? Did you need a break from the city? Like what?
yeah, well, my then wife was tired of the city, and she had
Okay.
discovered Beacon.
Okay.
And you know, I mentioned that the art museum Dia had opened just a couple of years ago, so there was a lot of buzz around. I mean, there
Okay.
was buzz around it, certainly within the art world and real estate speculators.
Right.
Yeah, and so I was looking for. There are two things. One, I'd worked for myself, so you know, I started Beehive for myself as a space to be, you know, as a co-working space because
Yeah.
I wanted that. But also I was looking for a way to kind of translate this social justice, progressive issue oriented work I was doing to something that was more sort of concrete and
Yeah.
localized and community focused. Because, you know, that anti-war documentary, I mean, we didn't stop the war with that. You know, I got butts and seats. I got people to go see it. The Dalai Lama, like he's getting his message of, you know, his nebulous message of world peace out, whether I'm working with him or not. So I wanted something that was a little more kind of concrete. And so I saw Beehive as a way of addressing my own personal, you know, work related stuff and need for community around work. And also as a way to kind of be a platform for community engagement. And so co-working was the business model and a means to an end, but it was much deeper than that. It was, as I said, a platform for community engagement, and that's manifested in a lot of ways over the years. So that's how it started, and that was early 2009. You know, I started small, 700 and some square feet, one room, and I eventually expanded in that building over the years. And then just 5 months ago, we relocated from that space down the street into a larger, you know, gut renovated space.
Wow. Okay, so how did you know I guess you'd seen Paragraph. Like, was that your model, or did you find what
So,
was the like? You're like, I need
yeah,
to. You sort of had this thing you wanted to solve,
yeah,
but
I
then
think I
like,
had,
okay, I'm gonna go sign a lease and do this. Like, what was
well,
that?
yeah, I mean, as you said, there wasn't a lot of information out there, but part of my progressive work and revolved around localism. And localism, if you don't know what localism really is, buy local is like a small part of it. It's a kind of it's a community development slash economic development kind of paradigm that was really nascent at the time. And I was following that because I was just interested in, again, like community. And it was, you know, it predated Occupy Wall Street, but it's Main Street versus Wall Street driven economy,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of what localism is. It touches on a bunch of different things like local renewable food systems, local renewable energy, or local sustainable food systems, local renewable energy, local media. And so I was really interested in that stuff. And in, I guess co-working kind of I mean, for me, it intersected with that.
Yeah.
And somehow I just kind of stumbled upon co-working as a movement
Yeah.
and started researching it. And then I had a very good year in 2008. I did a lot of really interesting projects, and then work slowed down a little bit. And so I had this time, and it was just a little bit flush. I mean, relative for me, I mean, this was at actually the recession, right?
Right.
2008 was
Yeah. I
the
was like,
end of,
okay, well, that's a good year to have a good, an
yeah.
unusual
Well,
year
so
to have a good
it's
year.
funny. It's like, people say that's a good time to start something. And
Yeah, right.
that
They
wasn't a
say that.
it wasn't a conscious decision for me. It just so happened I had time and energy and really was excited about doing something locally. And so I just started researching, and that's when I discovered that Google group and all those early pioneers, and got so much help from them, and just researched different models.
Ah,
And I very quickly threw it all together. And then I went and found a lease. I mean, at the time, the vacancy rate on Main Street in Beacon was in the high 30s. Again, this was
which is
this was in the recession.
yeah, but
Beacon
it also fit
was
your mission of like, I'm
totally,
going to sign a lease. I'm going to make
totally
use of this space. We're going to eat lunch on Main Street
going to
and
bring some vibrancy, do some interesting events, and bring people to this space. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. Okay, so you started with a small room with some desks, like kind of a dedicated desk, or was it all assigned seats?
Dedicated and flex, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not even a meeting room or a phone booth or anything like that.
I
And then I think about maybe a year and a half in, the second floor of the building came available. And that was, I think, about maybe 1,600 square feet. So I took that over. It was one really large room. There had been cubicles in there, and then a separate room and a little kitchen and a bathroom. And so I turned the separate room into a meeting room. And then the large room actually built out, my landlord built them for me, 5 small rooms that we made into small offices, 80 square feet, to the largest one was 220 or something.
Okay.
And so then I had, our main room, kind of lounge, desks, dedicated flex event space, and then the second floor with some private offices and such.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
And then actually, well, so, and then I think like 6 or 9 months after opening, this is before we took over the second floor, there's a really good locally owned magazine, regional magazine called Chronogram. It's a monthly free, like glossy, large format magazine. I knew the founders. I'd met them at some point just in, whatever, being in the region. And I told them about Beahive before I actually opened, as I was opening. And they owned a building in Kingston, which is where their office was. And it was a 3-story building. I think their offices were the second floor. The first floor was retail storefront, and it was empty. And so they asked me to open a Beahive there. And I'm like, well, let me open in Beacon first. Yeah. And so I did. And then a few months later, we partnered. And here's the thing. We just kind of threw together this kind of what eventually became a management agreement, like what people call that now.
Definitely nobody knew. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
No.
We didn't know. We didn't know it had a term. We just kind of
You're just like, okay, how can we
came
make
up with
this
this
work?
exactly. Like, we'll share everything, and we'll have some sort of revenue share, and it'll be Beehive brand and Beehive management manage it. You guys will help because you're there, whatever.
Yeah.
So that was the second location. I think that was November or December of 2009. So literally like 6-7 months after opening, and then that lasted maybe 2.5-3 years, and whatever.
But that was it.
That's how we started.
I love it. Okay, wait. So, well, tell me. We're going to keep going on the early days. How did you? Co-working was not really a term. No WeWork yet. I mean, WeWork was
maybe a few months after I started. So it was.
They were
2009. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
But
and in New York, so you're getting a sprinkling of that, but still not mainstream. No, it's so. How did you get members? How did people learn about what's Beehive? What do we do with Beehive?
Well, I mean, before I opened, I did some.
You're a PR guy. Okay, so
I'm a PR guy.
I know how to do this.
I organized, and Beacon's a small community, so and there are the right people. There was the right demographic of folks who had fled the city. Most of them worked for themselves. And I just, I brought people together and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's the mission and the vision. Here's the model. And, I signed up this is what the movement, what you used to do in the early days, right? You would sign up, you would get a core group together. You didn't just build it and they would come. You would actually engage and organize and build community before you opened. And that's what I did. And so it made it pretty easy. And again, we started small, and I just bootstrapped it. I mean, there was a Sears store in the next town over that was closed. I think it was Sears. They were closing. They had an
That
office
sounds
in the
about
back of
right.
the
Yeah.
they had an office in the back of the store with a bunch of desks. And I bought, I think, maybe 6 or 7 desks for like $30 total.
You're like, just
And there's a
take it.
there's
Yeah.
there's a used office furniture place across the river, and I bought some like basic Herman Miller chairs for maybe $50 a piece. I mean, I really bootstrapped this
Yeah.
thing. And I mean, the building was beautiful. It didn't need anything. It was a gorgeous 1904 building
Yeah. I mean,
that
East Coast architecture. I know anytime in
well,
San
yeah,
Francisco, we
and
have
actually
nothing.
an artisan owned it, and she had spent
Mm,
some time renovating it. It was beautiful brick, and just so I didn't
yeah.
put any money into the space
The
itself,
actual
really.
physical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a big deal, right?
Hmm.
Because, yeah, to not have to do that these days,
I
depending.
know. I mean,
Yes.
the relocation
Oh,
5 months,
right. You
like
just did that. Yeah.
I just did that, and I mean, I'm still paying. I mean, there's loans that will pay off for years, but I'm still paying the contractor who's been
Right.
generous to allow me to, to
Pay
delay
for
on
it.
some of the payment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy what it costs now. It's like a totally different experience from 14 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like
Totally.
legit now.
Yeah. Okay. So you're in, wait, your website says Beacon in Newburgh.
And Cold Spring, yeah.
Okay.
So I've had several that have opened and closed over the years. So Kingston, 6, 7, 8 months, whatever, after opening, that lasted, I think, about 2.5, 3 years. And then, we decided to close it for a number of reasons. I mean, I still didn't have the right model for managing, Kingston is 45 minutes away.
Okay.
Our spaces are not large enough where we have staff,
No,
right? So
right. Yeah.
still didn't have it quite worked out how to manage it remotely, 45 minutes away.
Yeah.
I couldn't go up there every day. I didn't want
Right.
to. They're
Yeah.
busy running their magazine. So, we did some really cool stuff, and it was relatively successful for a while. And then it just didn't make sense anymore. So we closed it. But in 2012, so I guess it was 3 years, almost 3 years to the day, 3 years to the month after opening in Beacon, we opened in Albany, which is a much larger market.
Yeah.
And that was a case where this successful commercial real estate broker, very successful in Albany, very well known, owned a building, had a space available, and read about Beehive in an in-flight magazine and reached out. And so then I ended up partnering with her, same thing, management agreement,
Yeah.
whatever we called it. By that point, I'd learned a little bit, from my experience in Kingston. So it was a little bit more formalized, and the contract was more of a contract. It was better structured. I had a lawyer draft that, whereas before I think we just kind of threw something together.
Yeah.
And actually we just closed that one last month. So it was over 11 years we had the Albany space, and it kind of evolved in different ways over the years.
Wait, and Albany is how far from you?
Hour and a half straight up the
Okay.
thruway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the state capital. But it's weird because my partner there, I wasn't involved in day-to-day at all.
Okay.
And I rarely went there. In fact, in the last 8 years, I mean, I went a few times. I mean, I just didn't go up there.
Yeah.
And it's because it didn't quite fit the mission and vision that
Yeah.
I
was
want.
gonna say,
And the
it's
brand,
very
like her,
market. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
different market, and she's different. And for her, it was a real estate play in a
Mhm.
way. I mean,
Yeah.
she's very involved in the community, but it still was, it was mostly a real estate play because that's what she is.
Yeah.
And so it never quite fit. It lasted 11 years because it just sort of, she ran it, and I just sort
Yeah.
of let it go. And I mean, she's mostly given up her practice now, and she gave up the building actually. So that's basically why we closed it. And yeah, so that, we opened in Albany in 2012, and then I went back to Kingston. So there's a community development and affordable housing nonprofit. There's a couple in the region. There's a really big one called Rupco in Kingston, and they were renovating an old warehouse in Kingston and turning it into affordable housing for artists. And I think there are like 52 or 53 units, something like that, and common space. And I reached out to them. I knew the folks. I've done a lot of other work in the region, which we can talk about or not. But I had a nonprofit, for example, a localism nonprofit for a number of years. So I knew the folks there. I reached out to them and said, hey, maybe we could partner and put a beehive in there. And, it'd be a free amenity for the resident, like the artists, and then open to membership to non-residents like usual. And there'd be this great interchange, or exchange, whatever, between artists who need business support and, typical Beehive members who could use a little creative input, whatever. Anyway, made sense. And so we did that. And again, it's, managing it was a little bit complicated. Now, the building had a property/community manager who also helped manage Beehive, but it was a little bit loose in how all of that worked. I'm sure this is sort of part of the learning process over the years.
Yeah, no, I love it. You experimented,
yeah.
You did all these things before anybody else was doing them. Like, yeah.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, at that point, that was, I think, 2015 when we went back to Kingston. So it was more or less mainstreamed by then. Is that right? 2015? I think that's right. So we only lasted maybe a year and a half there. And there are a number of reasons why it didn't work. Part of it was the sort of the lack of, the looseness around roles and structure and all that kind of stuff. And again, and Rupco's a nonprofit, and it's an affordable housing complex. So it was just a little bit funny. And there was, weirdness in the way that the residents interacted with our paying members. And, it's a business in there, so it was just kind of a weird thing that never quite got fully worked out. But Kingston now, actually, so we were early both times we were there, too early, I think. Kingston, I'm not sure if you heard about it, but during the pandemic became the fastest growing, municipality in the country because everyone escaped the city. And there's so it's not on the train line, but it is the Hudson Valley, and it's kind of the gateway to the Catskills, which is where everyone escaped to. So many people moved to Kingston during the pandemic. Real estate prices went through the roof, like a huge change. And now it's a thing. Now there are 2 vibrant co-working spaces there. I mean, when we were there, obviously there was none. So we were sort of too early and left. And, I talked to various folks over the years to try to partner and reopen there, and it just never happened. And then, I mean, now it's, we wouldn't go there. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's also still a small community. I think the population is 25,000. And then there's 2 vibrant spaces there. So around the time we went back to Kingston, we also opened in Peekskill, which is about half an hour south of Beacon, so closer to the city. Also another river town, not as developed at the time certainly as Beacon, and not even really as much as Kingston, but one of those river towns where people were moving to, right? People from the city. So there was a right demographic, just small. And that was very short-lived. That was a case where it wasn't the right partnership. We didn't have, it just wasn't the right fit for a number of reasons.
I mean, I think what you're running into just, again, there's just like more on the internet. You were still making it up. There are not that many like management partnership type things that get done. And you were really like, let's try it.
And also like these are, it's harder. I mean, you've done a lot of rural co-working, conversations over the years. And certainly in the Facebook group there is. I mean, that's only in the last, 5-7 years that's been a thing. And I mean, you can question whether you call the Hudson Valley rural. Certainly some areas are. Maybe ex-urban is better. But we're talking small communities. And so the models don't quite, they're not the same as a co-working space in a major metropolitan area that has hundreds of members and thousands of square feet. So it's a little bit harder. So I've always just kind of been making it up as I go along.
But even the partnership piece, managing remotely, how, when you can't staff with your own people that you've trained, how do you
Right.
instill the culture? Like there's a, it is hard, which I think is what you learned.
Well,
And the
also partnerships are hard,
in
even
general,
in general, because sometimes you seem like you're in alignment, and words are shallow, right? So people will sometimes say certain things, and then that's not always the case
yeah.
once you actually,
Yep.
month to month are trying to run things.
Right.
So yeah, anyway, it was short lived in Peekskill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So 3 locations now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, I've
Yeah.
always still been doing my PR and
Yeah. I
communications.
was going to ask about that.
And
Okay. Yeah.
about and I had this, I mentioned just briefly, I had this nonprofit for a number of years that I co-founded. I eventually became the board chair, and I did a lot of other kind of community initiatives in the region that didn't pay me. So I was really, about maybe 5 years ago, I was strung out. I was way too spread too thin. And Beehive was always sort of, I mean, it was my thing and it was a business, but it was always sort of a thing, one of many
Yeah.
things. And about 5 years ago, I realized there's a lot more I wanted to do with Beehive, and I was spread too thin. And so I worked with a coach to work out, like, I need to peel off some of this stuff. And I eventually left the nonprofit and started peeling off some of the other stuff and started to focus on Beehive more. And so then I started reaching out again proactively to look for potential partners to open in other cities, with a more kind of focused effort, right? And also, I'd learned so much at that point. I knew how I was going to structure things better from a sort of legal, partnership structure, but also operationally,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And at this point, Beehive had such a strong brand in the region. Anyway, so I made this concerted effort, and I connected with a big time developer slash GC in Poughkeepsie, and we talked about, they were developing a project, a pretty big multi-use project there, food hall and a market and a couple of floors of apartments and a co-working space. And so we were going to be the co-working space. And so that was a conversation that happened, that was ongoing for a while, because it was a big project and they were getting funding from the state and whatever, like grants or whatever, economic development stuff. They were also involved in a project in Newburgh. So Poughkeepsie is about 20 minutes, half an hour north of us, on the river as well. Actually, it's the terminus of the same train
Of the
line.
line. Okay.
Yeah, and you've heard of like
Yeah.
Poughkeepsie shows up in the TV shows and
Yeah.
films all the time. It's the end of the train line. Hyde Park, which is where FDR was from, is just below it. Newburgh is literally across the river from us. I'm looking at it now. Actually, it's right across the river.
Okay.
They were also involved in this project in Newburgh, multi-use project, multi-million-dollar renovation of an old factory, whatever. And so we talked about opening there as well. So these were conversations that were happening before the pandemic. And, the nature of renovating old buildings, especially in this region, and especially when you're getting grants, economic development grants. There were 7 apartments in Newburgh, and it was a new state program, a kind of affordable housing thing. So they're below market apartments, and they were also focusing on artists. So those kinds of things delay, right? So these conversations, I think, were going on for a couple of years, the conversations and the planning process,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And so just as I was starting to invest more time and some money, but time and energy into Beehive, the pandemic hit. And there was a lot of uncertainty, and it obviously delayed construction and all of that. But we went ahead and we opened in Newburgh in January of 2021, so 9-10 months after the pandemic hit. And actually, we did pretty well there. Like we filled it up pretty quickly within a few months. I think we have 14 private offices there, and I think by month 2, 80% were occupied, and then
Wow.
there were a couple of the larger ones left. And then by maybe month 3 or 4, they were all full. And then, the flex space was filling up too. So we were doing pretty well. Things were starting to rebound. I mean, a couple months after opening, the vaccine, got distributed.
But still, that was still like, early reemergence.
For sure. And you know what? And I have to tell you, my job, like probably a lot of co-working folks, before we opened in Newburgh was a, management agreement. Okay. So I didn't have money invested in it, right? That's all the partner, and they were doing that. But Beacon, I mean, my job became trying to get funding, right? PPP, idle loans, all that stuff, emergency grants from local nonprofits and stuff. I mean, that's what I did because, my revenue went like this.
Yeah.
The building had sold 3 months before the pandemic hit. And I signed a new 3-year lease. And because Beacon being Beacon, the rent, just kept going up. So I had this brand new lease with a brand new landlord who gave me no concessions.
Nothing.
And then the pandemic hit and my revenue just went
right.
So I spent all my time trying to just stay afloat, basically. So yeah, that's that. And that was that. And then we opened it in Newburgh, and Poughkeepsie, things happened there, and we ended up not partnering with them after all.
Okay.
So right now, we have Beacon and Newburgh, our main spaces. We have what I call an annex in the next town south of us in Cold Spring. An annex, I had opened one in Beacon in 2019, down the street from our flagship. It's just private offices. So there's no co-working, there are no meeting rooms, no events. And that's what we have in Cold Spring. Cold Spring is also on the train line. Gets a lot of tourists. It has one of the most popular hiking destinations, certainly on the East Coast, if not the country. A lot of people, because this train line, a lot of people come up from the city, and so they get a lot of tourists. But it's a vibrant little community where people live, and so we opened an annex of 7 private offices there.
Got it. Okay.
So those are the 3 locations we have currently.
Okay, so talk about team staffing, because you had posted about your ambassador program, and you've got on your blog, you've got an ambassador profile. What does that look like? Because I know people ask about that all the time, or people assume they have to be fully staffed, which is very hard in smaller spaces, but you need somebody sort of minding. You learn that right from some of your remote locations. It's like, well, you need somebody who's so talk about kind of the genesis of that and what it looks like.
So again, this is sort of, trying things and making it up as I go along. I don't remember at what point I started doing something like that. And it wasn't called community ambassador program. That is something I just packaged it maybe a couple of years ago and called it that. Before it was like an internship in quotes. Okay. Well, in quotes, because, I've had several folks who kind of had an internship with Beahive over the years, but they were maybe 5-10 years out of school. Like they weren't in school. So it wasn't really an internship.
Got it.
It's just that, maybe they were new to Beacon and they wanted to, or the area, and Beahive being what it was, and the brand and the presence it had in the region, and the fact that we were pioneering and, was this cool thing and did a lot of cool community things, people would reach out and say, hey, you're looking for help. And so I would just kind of bring them on and help me plan programs and, just kind of help me manage, the physical aspects of the space, the operational stuff, but in a very loose, unpaid way, because, I didn't have there was no budget to pay folks.
Yeah.
So again, I just, sort of would take people on who would reach out, or maybe I would ask someone, and obviously they would get membership, and they would get things out of it. So it was a kind of win-win. And there are people I've hired from time to time over the years. I mean, I have someone now, so I call them a community activator. Okay. And that's a very part-time, paid position. In fact, Sammy, who has been in that position now for a couple of years, has a full-time job. But when she started working with me, she didn't have a full-time job. She was kind of she was doing her own kind of consulting thing, and she had just moved to Newburgh. This is probably maybe a few months after we opened in Newburgh. She had just moved to Newburgh. She was one of the ones who fled the city during the pandemic, and she became a member. And soon after she joined, I hired her. I said, hey, I'm looking for part-time help. So I hired her as a community activator. And then the community ambassador program, which is what we call it now, I say that there are two elements to it. There's membership exchange, which is a sort of quid pro quo, whatever, I guess, quid pro quo. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but just an exchange, free membership, you're part of the community, and you just help us out. We ask for a commitment of at least 1 or 2 4-hour shifts a week, scheduled in the same days.
Okay.
And I think a 3-month commitment or something, 3 or 6 months. I think just 3 months. Again, because it's so sort of, loose.
Yep.
And it's really just to be on site. They don't really do a lot. It's just to answer questions, give a tour.
Yeah.
If there's a
door.
Meeting, if there's a non-member renting a meeting room, kind of orienting them, showing them the space, et cetera. It's pretty basic stuff. And
there's no member onboarding. There's no logging into things.
No, there can be. And that can be a part of it. Mostly I do that, or Sammy does that.
Okay.
And a lot of the onboarding, we could talk about this, operational, how that's changed over the years, because there's so many platforms now that didn't exist when we started.
Yeah.
That's a lot of that is streamlined.
Pretty automated. And
it's pretty automated. We do the human touch as much as we can, but we automate as much as we can too. What's the term, high touch? High tech, high touch, right?
Ooh,
I think that's the term. Yeah. So we try to do that as much as possible. So that's membership exchange, or we could do an actual internship. And I have had one formal internship over the years, someone who went to school nearby in SUNY Purchase, which is maybe half an hour away, who lived actually closer to us. And that was an formalized internship through their school. So we could do that as well, and we have suggestions, but it's a case by case basis. What do they want to get out of it, and what can we provide? We have a lot of different kinds of members, and we do all kinds of events, and so they can be as engaged in Beehive's business as much as they want to be, or not, or in members too, helping out members. So it's a packaged program, but it's also very kind of case by case basis.
Customizable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in general, your culture, do your members make their own coffee?
Yeah, but we're in Beacon especially, there's a coffee shop. We probably have 6 coffee shops in a town of 15,000, a mile long Main Street, because it's that kind of community. And a new one opened up across the street from us 2 weeks after in our new location, our relocation. Super fancy. You could find it. In fact, they own one in Tribeca in the city. They sell Shinola products as well. It's coffee and mercantile. It's super fancy. They have 19 brewing methods, and it's across the street. So yes, people make their own coffee, but mostly they just go out.
They'll go out and buy.
We have great coffee shops, and it's
amazing.
It's better to you break up the day a little bit.
Yeah, and support a local business. Somebody's got to support those six coffee shops,
right?
Yes, that's hilarious.
But yeah, a lot of operationally in a small space, right?
Yeah,
a town of 15,000. We have about 70 members in Beacon. We don't have hundreds, so we don't have full-time reception, right? It is members, there is an expectation that members will wash their dishes.
Yeah.
They'll clean up after themselves.
Yeah.
They can obviously book a phone booth or a meeting room themselves. We use Nexodus. And I've set all that stuff up, I'm told, pretty well, because I've been doing it for so long, and I have a communications background, so I know how to present things, right? And I don't know, I guess I'm a little OCD on things too. So I think it runs pretty smoothly. And people have told me this. And from doing it from so long and being so hands-on, I learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
So we don't have to have someone on site full time. You know,
No,
we have a
but I
code to
love
get
hearing
in.
this because I do think people make that assumption. I also think it's not that easy, to your point. Like, you've packaged things, you've set a tone, you've built a culture. So people kind of like learn, new members learn how to sort of integrate into that, and what is the expectation and how do we do this? Like, if you had members leaving dishes all over the place, and
Right. And we do
yeah,
onboard members. I
yeah,
said a lot of it's automated, and we have an
yeah,
FAQ. Nexus makes that easy. It's
yeah,
basically our members handbook, which used to be a PDF. And it's, again, there's a lot of stuff, like everything is in there. As you probably know, people don't always read,
yeah,
and I have to remind people from time to time.
yeah,
But we sit down with every member. We First of all, we meet everyone before they join. We don't have You
before.
can't
Okay.
sign up online,
Yeah.
right? That's
They come
hidden.
in for a tour. So you meet
They
everybody.
come in for a tour
Yeah.
and we want to meet everyone. Occasionally we'll talk to someone, like if we can't meet them and they really want to join before they're moving to town or whatever, like
Yeah.
we'll talk to them, we get a feel, right? That's part of the expectation too, right? We want to make sure that they know this is not a Regis. It's not a fully self-serve thing.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
culture.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah,
No, that's important though. Right. Because there's a fit. Right. And not
there's a
everybody's.
cultural fit and, again,
Yeah.
expectations,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't want, I'm very sensitive to, I mean, it's my thing. I'm very sensitive to people not having a good experience. And
Yeah.
so you need to set expectation. I
Yeah.
mean, I was a long time consultant. You set expectations with clients too, right? Like we can't get you on the front page of the New York Times. Like,
Yeah.
you know, some publicists may tell you that, but
Yeah.
I'm going to be real. Like, you have to set expectations. I just think that's the right way to operate.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I love that. So how is Newburgh staffed? Is that an ambassador? Or you have Sammy, you mentioned Sammy. She's
We
there.
don't have any. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Sammy lives in Newburgh. She basically manages it. And again, she's not on site all the time. She goes
Okay.
in when she needs to.
Yep.
She'll, if we have non-members renting a meeting room, for example, if she can't physically meet them, she'll talk to them beforehand. And
Okay, so
we
she just
have,
gives them a call.
yeah, and all that stuff,
Yeah.
again, is pretty well laid out. We have a
Yep.
bookings guide,
Yeah.
talks about parking and all that stuff. And they
Yep.
get all that digitally, but Sammy will either meet them or talk to them and go through it all beforehand, because, again,
Yep.
people don't read
Well,
always.
this is the thing. This came up in one of our groups recently. They're like, okay, so we're not fully staffed, and the manager wanted to like take time off, right? And so she's like, I'm really trying to audit all of our processes to make sure, because she's like, people, right, just won't read. And you put the sign on the door, the QR code on the door, and people just
Right.
don't. I like the phone call because at least, maybe get somebody live. You've made an extra connection effort. Pretty
For sure.
simple, but yeah,
And
that
people
can be.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
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 I mean, listen, I'd say 90, at least in Beacon. Sammy, as I mentioned, she now has a full-time job and has for a while, so she can't always physically
Yeah.
meet folks. I mean, she works remotely, but
Yep.
but she has calls. She's at home working. I'd say 90% of the time we physically meet folks, new members or non-members renting a
Yep.
meeting room in Newburgh. And in Beacon, because I live in Beacon, and it's basically my full-time thing now. It's probably 98% of the time
Okay.
that I will physically meet folks,
Wait,
because I want to.
What happens when Scott goes on vacation?
Well, Sammy will cover. And usually I still, I'm always working remotely. I'll still check emails and stuff. Now, there are times, I have a pretty intense meditation practice, and I will do silent retreats, and I'm not reachable at all, like not even text, whatever, the phone's off, right? Thank God I have Sammy for those times. And, I make sure that there's auto responders and all that.
Yeah.
And members will know, listen, I'm away for a week. Sammy will cover, reach out to her. And again, because of the expectations and the things are automated so well, it runs pretty smoothly. But that has been an issue over the years. There have been times when I didn't feel comfortable going away. I didn't have a community activator at the time, and so I would always be reluctant, and certainly to do a silent retreat, because I'm literally not reachable.
The building burned down, and literally you're not.
And I'm not checking emails, like I can't, right? So that is one of the drawbacks of running a small space and not having staff, at least full-time staff.
But so, and can you ask is the ambassador role set up to cover some of that time as well?
Yeah, but it's very limited. I mean, they're not paid, right? So if they have, one shift a week, like they're there for
not covering
4 or 5 hours. Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I've made it work over the years. My previous landlord, before she sold the building in Beacon, for example, she was great. You said, I think before the call started, about your landlord in California, how you
our barbecue.
I had a great relationship. She was an honorary member. She was a presence in the building. It's a small building, like 2 floors, whatever. So she would kind of be around too, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we're almost out of time.
Sorry, I'm just blabbering.
No, I love it. I love your story. That's why I was like, people always want questions, and I'm like, well, I can give you the list, but I'm not sure until we start talking. So I know it's super interesting. I mean, you're like a rare, there's not many people who have been doing this as long as you now. Yeah.
Jerome is still around. Alex Hillman is still around.
Totally is still around. Yes, and Alex, totally. And Tony does some interesting. What do you know? What I'm trying to remember what Tony is doing right now. Something cool and
community engagement. Yeah, community engagement stuff. And he got married recently, and I think he's moved to Connecticut. He's still in the area.
Okay.
I haven't spoken to. Actually, he reached out. He was consulting with someone in Peekskill who bought a building and was thinking of doing a co-working thing. He was consulting with them, and he reached out to me. I can't remember if this was just before the pandemic or just after. Okay. And so he reached out because he knows I know the area, the region so much. I think that was the last time I talked to him, but yeah.
Okay. So if you could give your 2009 self a couple of pieces of advice, what would it be?
Oh yeah. Wow. Think long term, because even though I was building a brand and a vision, it's still, as I said, it was always like one of the many things I did. And if I was always, even in Beacon with my initial landlord, I was always doing year to year, right? And I wish I would have planned better. And maybe I wish I would have gotten partners to even, I tried to buy the building when she sold it a few years ago, but I couldn't make that happen. But I wish I would have thought about that before and tried to buy properties. I'm not a real estate guy. I mean, I've learned what I learned to make Beahive work, but I don't like that world, honestly. That said, I wish I would have engaged with it more and learned a little bit more about it and tried to get partners to buy property, because obviously, I mean, I know I'm pretty sure you've talked about this a lot on the podcast
really
and the group over the years.
Yeah.
And different ways of making management agreements or owning and whatever. So I mean, financially, I think it probably makes more sense, especially because real estate being what it is. Yeah. And also you have more autonomy, right? You have more control. This is part of the issue I had when the building sold in our flagship is that there were just too many constraints on us that my previous landlord did not give us. Besides, we had outgrown the space and the rent, whatever. We just didn't have the autonomy that we needed to. You own the building, you have complete autonomy, right?
Yeah, so totally. Think long term. Okay, give me one more.
Go into partnerships with, what's the expression, like wider open eyes, I guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, I guess, I mean, in the business world, I've always equated business partners with relationships, right? It's like your wife, it's like you're getting married, right?
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's a bit extreme, but there's some truth to that. And just like when you start a new romantic relationship, you'll overlook certain things because you want to make it work, or
evidence that this is going to work. This is going to be
it's fine because all these other things.
Yeah.
You think all these other things overshadow those things.
Yeah.
So, and that's certainly been, my case. It's like, oh, it's okay. It'll work out. Yeah. Watch for those red flags, and sometimes they do work out, but notice them, I guess, a little bit heed them a little more.
Heed them. Yes, that's a good way to put it. Good way to put it. Okay, Scott, how are you gonna spend your weekend?
Oh my God, I never know.
Oh,
What am I doing this weekend? I don't have any plans actually.
Are you a hiker,
Actually,
a cooker, and
I mean, Beacon is there's great hiking in the region, but I will say actually, so I mentioned we relocated 5 months ago, and I got last weekend there was a second annual Beacon Bonfire Fest, 150 different concerts and events happening in Beacon, up and down Main Street, 25 different venues. Beehive was a venue, and we programmed and we suggested this to the Beacon Bonfire organizers. We programmed a wellness corner each day. So we had, I think, 4 or 5 things happening each day. And then there were regular kind of music performances at night at Beehive too, as part of the regular bonfire stuff. And it felt so good because we really activated the space in the way that we haven't since we relocated. And we haven't done a lot of stuff since COVID, even though pre-COVID, that's, a main reason I started Beehive. It felt so good. And the weather is beautiful. People were out in the streets. And it just, one of the performances we had Saturday night, I came back from seeing my partner perform down the street. She was performing as one of the 150 concerts. And so I came back and we had a performance. So I came back and they were still doing sound check. I had set up, we were supposed to have chill performances in our space. I had set up seats for just maybe 15 or 20 people. And I walked in and there were probably 70 people.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm like, oh my God, I'm pushing people out of the way, moving plants to make more room and pulling chairs out of the conference room. And it just was beautiful. Anyway, that was last weekend, and it was so exhausting because not only Beehive being a venue and hosting, but I went to a lot of things too. Yeah. So anyway, I think I'm chill this weekend.
Nice, but chill and re-energized. It sounds like kind of really connected with your why for the space, which is
totally. And it just felt again like we haven't done anything of that scale since the pandemic, and certainly not in this newly relocated and renovated space. And it re-energized me for Beehive for sure in terms of events and community engagement. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I could talk to you forever, but now we are officially over time. So I'm going to let you go. Thank you for taking time to do this. I'm going to link to Beehive in the show notes, which you can see if you're listening on your phone. You can just kind of click the link and see what they're up to. You have a beautiful website. The thing I like about your website is I get like this human vibe.
Good.
Lots of photos of people and you just get this like human feeling versus anyway, we won't talk about the verses, but it's great. Thank you for taking the time. It was great to get to know you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Likewise.